Hi, I just love that music. I don't know why. It reminds me of the 70s. And I picked that one on purpose too. So every time it just makes me rock out. So good morning, Miss Megan. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing, Sabrina?
Good. So, hi everyone out there. Welcome to Sipping Tea with Sabrina. In just a second, guys, we're going to be sharing the tea on major gift fundraising for nonprofits. But if you haven't met me before, I'm Sabrina. I'm the founder of Supporting World's Hope, a nonprofit coaching and consulting company. I started after 25 years in the industry, and we have with us today Miss Megan, and Megan is from Megan Amundson Consulting. Now, Megan, did I say your last name correct?
You did a great job, I have to
Thank
say.
you. I practice. I really did. I don't know if I told you I literally live about 10 miles away from the Mexico border, and I try to make everyone's name have flair. And sometimes I can butcher a name. So I'm so glad I really practiced that. So I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, because you know if people are not working on individual donors, they are missing a major way to raise major gifts, right? And it's time for them to start. And so, because this pandemic showed us that special events and other fundraising opportunities can disappear overnight, but major gifts and people will always be there, and it's a viable and thriving option. So that's why we have Miss Megan here. But before we get started, if you can click the heart or the like button as you're coming in and joining us, and you can, so we can know that you can hear us loud and clear. And not only that, it's going to help us with those Facebook algorithms that are constantly changing. So if you could do that, that would be great. I see people are coming in, Megan. Y'all write your name down. I always do me a heart, do something, because I always like to acknowledge people that show up so that Megan and I can see who's in here and we can acknowledge you. And so there we got Vincent James. He got in, Megan. Yeah.
Good to
I know
see
he
you,
had a little
Vincent. Glad you
trouble.
made it.
Yeah, he made it with Keep Music Alive. So he is here. So thank you, Vincent James, for showing up. We are so excited to have you here. And so let's kind of get started here. Megan, share a little bit about yourself and your experience.
So, I've spent 20 years in the nonprofit sector. I was doing political advocacy for most of that. I did policy work. I was a lobbyist for a long time. I did campaign work, and then I ran political advocacy nonprofits. And at some point, I left politics and I became a major gift officer. But I took some moments, a few years into being a major gift officer, and thought, when I became an executive director, I had no fundraising experience. None. None at all. In fact, I had avoided it up until that point. But I understood that if I'm going to run the organization, there's an expectation that I was going to fundraise and I needed to be good at that. And it freaked me out. It was terrifying. And I worked really hard and I flailed a lot. And I eventually got there. And I loved it. But after a few years of being a major gift officer in a sophisticated, development shop with all the bells and whistles that I didn't have at my very scrappy nonprofits that I ran, I took time and I thought, have I really learned anything in this time as a major gift officer that I didn't already know? And when I thought about it, I was like, oh my gosh, I learned so much that I wish I knew. So that's where my consulting practice came from. I coach and I train nonprofit leaders to be really great fundraisers with individuals because, like you said, Sabrina, individuals are the backbone of your organization's financials because they will stay with you when grants turn over and corporations leave. It's those individuals that have built a strong relationship with the organization who stay. And It's just so important for long-term sustainability.
It really is. It's so important. And people always think it's grants or corporation that gives the most. It's people. So I'm so excited to have you here.
It's people.
Yep.
It's
So
people.
I just know that we have about 8 questions, and I promise to get you out of here by 10:45ish. But get all the knowledge that you have and get questions answered by the group. So I have a question for you. One of my first questions is, how do you determine what is a major gift?
So I actually love this question because it is so confusing when you don't have the fundraising background. And it's hard for me to say, well, it depends on you, but it's true. And this is how I think about it. Every organization defines a major gift in different ways. But here's how to think about what that money range should be for your organization. Now, when you have a major gift program, this is about having a personalized relationship with donors. So you need to have enough donors that you're really building on the donors you have and building them up the ladder of giving and really investing in people who already care about you, but not so many donors that you can't provide that individualized attention to them. So when you're thinking about the range, like the monetary range, think about how many donors do you have in that range, and can you actually manage that individualized attention that they deserve? Because at the end of the day, your donors need to be happy with their engagement with your organization. So if it's too many and you can't do it, then they're never actually going to really invest in your organization. And if it's too few, you've made that, that range too high or too small. Okay. Then it's not enough people to really build a major donor program. So these are your top donors. It's enough top donors that you can be personalized with. When I was an executive director, I did focus a lot on fundraising because I had to rebuild an organization, and it was financially in a lot of trouble. So I spent about a third of my time doing fundraising, and that meant that I had somewhere between 30 and 40 people who I maintained personal relationships with throughout the year, who were my major donor pool, my responsibility as the executive director to have relationships with. But I was spending a third of my time on fundraising. So you have to think about what is your organization's capacity, and then how many people can you actually manage that with. And as you get more sophisticated with your major gifts program, then you start thinking about who do you bring into your circle to help provide personalized attention to your donors so that you can expand that. Because you are always going to be, as an executive director, one person. Mm-hmm. But maybe your development staff become more, and they can help you with this. And your board really invests, and they can help you with this. So there are ways to think about expanding that. But when you're just starting out, it just has to be a manageable number for the executive.
Yeah, a manageable number. And I always tell people, when they ask that question about major gifts, I'm like, if you get a check in the mail and you squeal, that's a major gift amount for your organization. But you're more focused on how many people you can handle in your portfolio based on an amount.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Because if at the end of the day, you've defined so many people as major donors, then they're still getting that automated relationship your low dollar donors are getting. And then are you really building them up? Because those major donors, those are the people that you invest in because they invest in you. And those are the people with a lot of growth opportunity. So if Vincent says it's $100 for us, yes, absolutely. Then it's $100 for you. And you lean into those folks giving more than $100, and then they become bigger and bigger donors for you. That's how to think about it. So if your highest donor is giving you $500 and you've defined a major donor as someone who gives you $5,000, you're missing an opportunity to really, really invest in your donors so that they invest in you.
Got it. So what is major gift fundraising? Because you established some amounts. You said 100, you said 500, 5,000. At the end of the day, what is major gift fundraising?
At the end of the day, major gift fundraising is having a personalized relationship with a donor where you can ask them for large gifts. And it's all about the deep relationship. You've gotten to know that person. They know your organization really well. They feel comfortable with your leadership. They feel comfortable in the impact your organization's having. They get excited about investing in you more to have more impact. That's major gift fundraising. But that kind of relationship is pretty time intensive. So you only have the ability to have that relationship with a small number of people. So you have to pick them wisely. And you have to start with the people who are already giving at that highest level for you in your organization. There are going to be other people in your donor pool who have capacity to give more than they're giving today. And we're going to get into my recommendations for how to approach that. But those are not necessarily people that you invest a lot of time in without determining whether they are ready to be your major donors yet.
Okay. And so let's say if, because you said you came in an organization that had crisis going on. So I'm going to ask you that on this same question on that side of the house. But what if you're new? How do you start a major gift fundraising? That's part A of the question. And then part B of the question is, what if you walked into a situation like you did, right? How do you start a major gift fundraising when you're dealing with that? So if you could answer those kind of two, part A and B. Sorry about that. That's a question number 3, A and B. That will be great for us.
So let's start with, if you're an established organization and you have donors, okay? Because that's an easier question to answer, because you've got people sitting in your donor pool who are already giving to you. They already know you. They already like you. They like you enough that they give to you. Those are your warmest prospects for building a major donor program. So what you do is you start getting to know those donors, right? There are lots of ways to think about how to prioritize your existing donor pool for being strategic about who you reach out to start to build that personalized relationship. But that's kind of the very start, is thinking about who exists with you, who you think has the capacity and the interest to be a bigger donor for you. Mm-hmm. Now, if your organization is a startup and you're just starting out, then you don't have so many people sitting in your donor pool already. You're just getting the word out. Then building a major donor pool is about relational networking. Because people give, actually, I'm going to ask you, Sabrina. Sabrina, the last organization that you gave to for the first time, why did you give?
The last organization that I gave to for the first time actually was an organization in my hometown. And I gave to that organization, 1, because I know the CEO, and 2, because it was my hometown. And I know the challenges that are faced there. So I thought he was doing a great job, and we've had conversations. I'm on their newsletter, and that's what I gave.
So that was a networked kind of donor engagement, essentially. You knew somebody who was involved with the organization, who was talking to you about the great work that the organization is doing, right? They were talking to you, I'm guessing, about the impact that they're having, and that they've got a really great vision for what they could do with your help. So
that's a center. Yay! Sorry.
Right. And that's how you build it as a startup. You have to network into these relationships, because people just don't give to you out of the blue. They have to learn about you first, right?
Right.
And so that's when you start thinking about network mapping, which is a fun other conversation. But you start thinking about, it's the typical, who do your board members know? Who do your staff know? Who do you know? What circles do you run in? Who else, if you're out there being a great ambassador for your organization, talking about your organization, when you're starting to meet people, and, when you're just out in the world, you're excited about it. People get excited with you. And that's how they get to know your organization. And that's when the donors start to come out of the woodwork.
Yeah. And I just want to put a little plug in for my VIP resource library. What Megan is talking about is I call it a list generator. A VIP library, Megan, so it's free. It's through my website once they sign up. And it's a tool in there called a list generator. And it's exactly what you said. When people tell you to map out your network, your mind goes blank. So it kind of helps you, like, who do I know I go to church with? Who do I know that's in a civic club? That kind of thing. Because I know sometimes your mind goes blank. We do this for a living, and my mind still goes blank. So go back to, if you're new, are you suggesting that for the new people that they do this network mapping to start a major gift fundraising, or would you do something different?
I would start there with the acknowledgement that people aren't going to come to you as major donors. right? Because it really, the first step in building a major donor program is just building a donor pool. And a large enough donor pool that you start building relationships with those donors. I think it's often thought of, right? When I didn't have any fundraising experience and I walked into this, role as an executive director for the first time, and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? The first thing you think about is, who do I know that has a lot of money?
Yeah.
And it's probably the first thing your board members think of too. Like, who has a lot of money? Right? Yeah. Who knows Oprah? Who knows Matt Damon? I did a lot of work at Boston, so that was a very common question. Who knows Matt Damon? And like thinking about people in capacity is a piece of thinking about who can be major donors, but it is not the piece. So thinking just about people and their capacity isn't enough to really start investing in people. Just because somebody has a lot of money does not mean that you start spending hours a week thinking about how to bring them in. Because that's not the only question you need to answer before deciding that it's worth your organization's time and capacity to invest in that person. So building that pool, people who like you, people who know you, people who are excited about you, those are your warmest folks for building a major donor program. So as long as you are out there, and honestly, Sabrina, like the real first step for me when I work with nonprofits, when I talk to nonprofits, is never what anyone wants to hear. But the real first step in building a major donor program is being very clear on your impact and shouting it from the roofs. Yeah. Everyone gets excited about organizations that are impactful. So that has to be your core messaging and communications to the world. Because when your staff and you're in it, you're not thinking necessarily about the impact, right? You're thinking about, this is my to-do list. These are the problems we have to solve. These are like, this is the thing that I'm working on today. But that's not what your donors are thinking about. It's not what your volunteers are thinking. It's not what your board is thinking about. And honestly, this is really great for your staff to hear over and over and over again what they're doing is impactful.
Yeah, people like to call it success. I mean, are you making an impact at the end of the day? And shout it. Stop being the best kept secret. Put it out there.
From the rooftops. So if you are just out in the world and all you're talking about is how impactful your organization is, guess what? People are going to be really excited about how impactful your organization is. That's when people come out of the woodwork. That's when people start getting really engaged. That's when you have new board members who want to be, part of this. That's when staff have really high morale. Like that's when you build your volunteer programs. That's when everything happens. But it's really hard.
You're saying something, and I want to say it in the inverse. I want nonprofits to stop saying how they're struggling or going to donors and saying, if you don't do this, our doors will close. That is not the way to attract major donors. Listen to what Megan is saying. Share your impact. Share the success. No one wants to invest their dollars in an organization that is struggling. And if that is your way of fundraising, you're not going to have a major gifts program. Listen to what she's saying. Impact, and shout it from the rafters. That's what you have to do. So, Meg, I have one question that's not on here, but I know you can answer this question because I struggled with this when I was a CEO. So I'm not endorsing any system or anything like this, but in order to do these relationships in the way that you're saying, you need to have a CRM system. And in my opinion, I'm sharing this with you because I tried for a long, long time to do it in Excel and it didn't work for me. What is your opinion on that? Maybe you don't even agree, but what's your opinion on it?
There definitely needs to be a tracking mechanism. I think the CRM that you use is dependent on the size and number of people who have to be in the loop on that. So I think that Excel spreadsheets can work. If you're a startup and this is what you've got, then absolutely, they can be very effective. But you're right, you need a way to be able to tag people, to be able to keep notes from meetings, so you have institutional history on folks. The worst thing that can happen is you have a staff person who has all the information in their head and in their heart, and they leave, or something happens, and they're not there anymore. And then you're like, we don't even know who our donors are.
Yeah.
Like who like somebody sent in a check. Do we know them? Do we not know them? What do we know about them? And on the donor side, like your entire goal is to make your donors feel really great, make them feel impactful, make them feel appreciated. All of your donor communication is aimed at that. And if your donors have a relationship with your organization, or they think they do, and then suddenly people are like calling them up being like, so who are you? whoa, wait, what happened? It makes you look like you don't have your act together. And there's nothing that you want to communicate out into the world less than you don't have your act together. So yes, having some kind of system where all this information gets kept for institutional knowledge is critically important.
Yeah. And I've had that experience because I had a board member who passed away. People pass away, and she had a lot of that. And then myself, when I retired, I would say I was not as good as I should have been about updating our system. And so a lot of that knowledge when I retired came with me, and now I'm helping the person who took over my position get those institutional notes in the system, because sometimes you just get so busy you don't do it, and then you realize, ooh, I should have been paying attention to that and doing that more. So what other things can nonprofits do to ensure a successful major gift fundraising program?
You want to be really clear on your case, right? Like we're branching out into a lot of territory, but if you want to build a personal relationship with a donor, right, you have to know your impact to be able to express it. And you need to be able to make a really concise case. Like, why you, why now? That's it. Like, you have a vision. There's a problem you're solving. You know, it's us right now because we're the only organization in this space, or because we're pulling all the organizations in this space together to solve this problem, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Being really concise about that, like you have a vision, you have a strategy, you know what you're doing is really what you're expressing, and it's compelling for donors who are investing large sums of money into you to really feel like they understand how you're thinking about solving the problem, reaching your mission, whatever the impact is that you're shooting for. Like, they have to have trust and faith in you as an organization and as leadership to know that, like, okay, like you can achieve this, and my investment gets you closer to that. So that's a really key part of that conversation that you have, and getting to know those donors and making sure that they're hearing that from you frequently. Like, yes, we're impactful, and we tell you our impact, up and down all day long. And like, we are important, and, this is urgent, and, right, whatever the reasons are, why us, why now? You have to be able to answer that question for donors. And there's nothing worse than having a donor who is philanthropically savvy, right? Who gives to organizations, who knows what this conversation should be, come to the conversation more prepared for it than you are.
Yeah, that's nothing worse. Yeah. There's nothing worse than that. So if you want people who are philanthropic, just like you said, you got to come to the table prepared. So I'm excited. So if you're just joining us, welcome to this broadcast. We're currently talking about major gift fundraising for nonprofits, and we've just covered some good topics. And some of the things that we covered is really, determining what your caseload can be, what your portfolio could be. That means how many people can you manage and have a good relationship with? Also making sure that you are not the best kept secret in the community, and you are sharing your impact over and over and over again, and starting out with your network when you're wanting to do major gifts. I have people here, and I just want to say their names because, again, you showed up. I know we already shouted out Vincent. We got Paige here. We got Laura here, Maria. Hey, Yila, how are you doing? We have Unbound Visual Arts here. So, and we have questions already. We're going to begin to the questions at the end. We have about 4 more questions for Megan as we get through this, and then we'll get to your personalized questions. So, Megan, I know you talked about network mapping and things like that, but where can I find? I hear network mapping, and I'm new to this. and it might seem like a really big process. Tell me a little bit more about network mapping and where I can find major gift donors.
So it's a really great question. Sabrina, you have tools that you provide with nonprofits that help them think through. I have a similar, series of questions that, folks can think about if they go, who do I actually know in my network so I don't go blank, right? John Gary's got a really great, mobilize your army kind of thing. So spending 10 minutes and like sitting down with a worksheet that guides you through some questions helps you to think about it. It helps your board members to think about it. It helps your staff to think about it. Don't underestimate your staff. Just to think about who actually do I know, and think about it in terms of not who do I know that has a lot of money, because that is not actually the indicator of who's going to be a major donor. It's who do I know that I think cares about this too, that shares my values, shares my interests. And I think, what this organization does really aligns with what they care about. That's the key question that you're asking yourself when you're thinking about who's in my network. Because you might be really surprised about who's got capacity that you don't know about. Or even if they don't have capacity, they are just very philanthropic.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say.
You can look at like what they make. I've worked with donors who, will talk about, oh, I had this like really modest lifestyle. I made a couple like good decisions, and I'm just, I don't spend a lot. So I have all this money, and they're so philanthropic. They just give it all away. And like, how would you know that if you didn't have a relationship with them? So assuming that who has capacity is actually missing a whole segment of folks who would give you significant gifts if they knew about you and understood the impact you have, and you could bring them in. So start by thinking there when you're thinking network mapping. Answer some questions about like, who do I have dinner with? What businesses do I patronize where I know the owner? I hear
who's my business? Who's my, all those service-based that you do. Yeah.
And I hear from board members, oh, I was talking with my mechanic, and it turns out they really care about this. And guess what? When you own your mechanic business, you probably do pretty well, and they're really philanthropic, and they start giving significant gifts to the organization. There was a question that came in, like, about like, where do I shout from the rooftops about impact? It's like literally in every conversation you have, right? Like you're waiting for your car to be done, you're chit-chatting with, the person at the counter. Oh yeah, I do this really interesting work with this organization. It's super exciting, you're getting your hairstyle.
Yeah, Megan, you weave it in wherever you are. When people see you coming, they should think of your nonprofit. That was my philosophy. Like just
because it comes in with, Sabrina, it comes in with, hey Sabrina, how you doing? Right? The answer is, I'm doing great. I'm doing this amazing work with this nonprofit, and it's super exciting. It like feeds my soul.
Yep.
Right? That's shouting it from the rooftops, is being that great ambassador where you're just talking about it everywhere, because it's a big part of who you are, probably. Yep. And like, why wouldn't you tell the world like how excited you are about this work that you get to do?
Yep. I 100% agree. And there's a couple of things that you said in there that I want to unpack. One is, and answering that question is, the thing that I tell people is you cannot run your nonprofit from your desk. Sorry, you got to get out there. You got to network. You got to tell people who you are over and over and over again. And think about human nature too. People have to hear things 7 times before it sinks in. And not to throw any shade, Megan, how many emails did we get that said, where's the Zoom link?
Yeah, well, okay.
And it was there writing. This is going to be streaming in the Facebook group 3 or 4 times. So people have to hear and see and read stuff at least 7 times before it even kicks in or resonates.
Yeah, and when you're trained to think in a certain way and people are asking you to think in a different way, like there's a transition. Sabrina, I will tell you though, I heard recently, and this made my soul cry a little bit, that's not 7 times anymore, it's 9 times.
Wow. With social media and our attention span? Probably,
Yeah.
yeah.
Ooh.
9 times. So guys, that means you got to get out there and say it over and over. You gotta get tired of hearing yourself.
Yeah. I really like that, Sabrina. I really like that you can't run a nonprofit from your desk. I think that's a great one-liner. I'm going to use that. I'm gonna credit you though.
Yeah, it's okay, but you can't. You can't. People need to know who you are, and that's how you're going to do this. So and that's the next one. How do I get potential donors to notice me?
Yeah. Shout your impact from the rooftops. Shout it out. People want to be part of exciting things and impactful things.
So when you say shout it from the rooftops, are you referring to, I know, like speaking it, I get that. How much money, and this is not the question that's there, but since we got you as the expert here, I'm going to ask, how much money do you think should be invested in marketing or like collateral material? If you were trying to do this, would you invest in that?
So, I have in the past. Here's the bigger question. How do you communicate? How do your people hear from you? Right?
Okay.
You communicate through all of these channels. But it's important to know, how do they actually receive that information? Because if your base hears from you via email and they're responsive on email and they open those emails, then do you have to invest in a lot of print collateral? Like, no, because your people find you on email. If your people on social media, right, that's how you find them. But for me, and also this was like a number of years ago, like my donors were used to and trained to hear from us by mail. So yes, I did invest in some of that collateral and it went on the mail because that's how I knew that they were used to hearing from us. So I think that's a question that each organization has to ask itself. And asking yourself that question for the first time can be a scary question, but it is a trigger to start gathering some data. Like, where are people actually engaging with you? Because it matters in where you make investments for this communications. So I think it's really important to have some design, whether your collateral is print or whether it goes on social media, whether it goes out by email. I have arrived at an opinion after years of trial and error that having well-designed whatever it is in front of somebody, where the design helps tell the story, so it's not a wall of text, really matters. Because we say you have to hear something 7 to 9 times. You've also got less than 10 seconds of somebody's attention. So if they're going to glance at something and you need them to take that information in at a 5 to 7 second glance, you need the graphics to tell some of your story. And it will hopefully pull them in to read the text. But if you're handing them paragraphs of text, are they going to sit down and read it? I mean, maybe if you've been very strategic in bolding and underlining and tagging, and you've drawn their eye to the key points, but you have to be really thoughtful about how you draw the eye of the person that you've got 7 seconds of their attention to tell that story. That is where I think investment really does matter. Because I would do impact reports, and I believe so strongly, and I advocate so strongly for nonprofits to do regular impact reporting. And it can look like really different things for different nonprofits, depending on how they communicate with their donors and how their donors receive information from them, and how long it is. Like, who is your base? Different organizations have really different cultures in their base and what their donors want to hear and how much content. And like, some donors will really dig in, and some donors are like, I just glance at it. But I would do impact reports quarterly. No, we did 3 a year. Not quite.
Okay. I did too. That's a lot. 2 a year.
We aimed for quarterly. We didn't quite hit it because these are kind of time intensive, because you have to think through the impact, right? What do you quantify? What do you qualify? How do you tell that story? That's where the most investment goes in, is how do you tell that story of your impact? But once you have it, it's something that's pretty designed that people can read easily, and you get it in front of somebody. I would call up my major donors after we release one, and I'd say, hey, blah, 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 chit chat. Did you see the thing that we just sent you? I wanted to make sure that you got it. And every time they would say, oh, no, I didn't see that. And I would say, oh, well, it talks about this thing that we did that's really exciting. They'd be like, oh, yeah, I did see that. So they will have no memory of receiving like an impact report, right? This isn't a report. They have no memory of the specific content. What they walk away with is a gist of your impact.
Right.
And that's what they remember.
They start remembering that story that you shared. And just for that tool, because I can hear some people going, design, I don't know how to do it. Canva and Canva Pro is free for nonprofits. So they have plenty of templates in there. And I'm a little tip here. I used to collect everybody's stuff. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Look for other nonprofit stuff that you like and emulate. It is like flattery. So don't worry about that piece. Listen to what Megan is saying. She's
Yeah.
saying get the impact reports out there. And you got to get through the noise of it to get noticed. So we're going to move into, we talked about the ask early on, but we're going to kind of move into the ask, right? Because we know you got to build a relationship with donors. You got to get noticed. You got to share your impact. Those are the things that you have to do for your major fundraising. But how much time should go into that before you contact a donor about giving?
So you don't need to wait forever, right? There aren't a million perfect pieces you need to put in place, right? You just need to be able to make sure that when you go into a conversation with a donor, that you are clear about your impact, that you can express that, even if you don't have perfect data behind it, even if you don't have everything you wish you had, and that you're really clear on what the case is that you're making, because there's nothing worse than being wishy-washy. You get one shot at a new major donor, and you want that conversation to go well. So you want to be prepared with those key pieces. But the conversation itself, because that's really what we're talking about. What does this conversation look like? It's not just an ask. And I would be told. So when I was told, I walked in as a new ED. I was handed a list. It was like literally a paper pile because we kept all of our meeting notes in paper. I was handed a binder and I was told, go build relationships with these people. And I was like, oh my God, well, what does that mean? And, we mentioned this on our promo that we did earlier, Sabrina, but it's about building a philanthropic relationship, right? Like, this is a relationship that's about philanthropy. Everyone comes to the table knowing that we're talking about philanthropy. There are a lot of questions that come along with building a philanthropic relationship, ways that you want to get to know your donor as a philanthropist. So a lot of this conversation is really about what they care about. Why you and your organization? What do they give? Where do they give? Why do they give? You learn a lot about somebody. And then when you pivot into, okay, well, this is the impact we're having, and this is why, people should give to us and why they should give to us now so that we can do the magical things that we're about to do. It's a pretty natural conversion. Sometimes your donors are already there and they're like, okay, I'm going to give you X amount. I'm just going to double my gift to you. And you say, thank you. And sometimes you come prepared with a number where you say, I would love for you to consider, this kind of gift this year, given how impactful we are, given, this really great case I just made for you about why this gift is the right gift for you and your investment. And given what you care about and given your philanthropy, kind of molding that in. But the more that you get to know somebody as a philanthropist, your organization, the more detailed the questions become that you want to know about them, because the more sophisticated you start thinking about them and the strategy for working with that donor and being that good partner with that donor where they're getting from you as the organization what they need from you to keep investing as well. Because donors need to be happy. At the end of the day, they need to feel like they're impactful. They need to feel appreciated. They need to feel like their investment in you was a good investment for them to keep investing and to invest more.
Yep, so you have to be the one to keep telling them that, right, Megan? I mean, you have to. Yep.
7 to 9 times a year.
We're gonna go with 9. I feel you on that. It's got to be 9 with the social media and all of that. Girl, I was up to like 2:00 this morning on TikTok, so it's got to be 9, and people are just funny. So I get that, to keep my attention. And you know what? It goes to your point. Like, if 5 seconds into not even 5 seconds, a second into a TikTok, if you ain't captured me, I'm scrolling to the next one. And that's just our society. Just kind of know that going in. So what are some of the other like major gift fundraising best practices that you can share with us?
So I think that the conversation is really important. And for me, as an executive director, like the conversation was my psychological block because I just didn't know what I was supposed to be talking about. I didn't know what that was supposed to be. I wasn't sure if I was going into conversations, if they were the right conversations. And I would take advice from expert, like in a vacuum. And I would try to apply that advice. And it was terrible. It was really terrible because I wasn't really thinking about what is this conversation? What do I want to know? Which is why, Sabrina, you're going to be sharing with everyone on this Facebook Live a little download that I created that I use a lot. And I use it a lot with boards because it's essentially 10 steps to having a successful donor conversation. It's a checklist, though, right? It's not an ordered number. I'm not telling you that you start here in the conversation, then you go to this topic in the conversation, then you go there. These are organic conversations, and they have to be. Because you have to be you and your donor has to be who your donor is. And you have to have a real relationship build. But it's a relationship with an agenda for you. And you need to keep the agenda in mind too, right? You're not building a relationship for the sake of building a relationship. You have a reason to have this relationship. So there are little boxes you need to check along the way. So I have this little 10 steps to a donor conversation. I really boil it down in this. So if you're newer to fundraising, this could be a really great starting point. If you're thinking, how do I get my board involved? This is a great starting point for them as volunteers who aren't professional fundraisers. Just to start to get over that psychological block of, I don't know what this conversation is supposed to be, and it terrifies me. Which was a space I sat in for a really long time. So learn from me. Learn from my mistakes.
It is what happens to CEOs all the time. You get a binder and some keys, and they're like, "Go at it," and that's kind of it. That's your orientation. So I feel you on that. We do have several questions that have come up, and I want to get to those. So I'm going to start from the top, and I'm going to be looking down. So keep it friendly. So Vincent asked early on, and you may have answered this, but I think it's worth repeating. He says, are you choosing donors for major gift programs based on the amounts they have given in the past, or what you think they might be able to do in the future?
So if they're existing donors, I would start with the people who are giving at your highest level because they're already giving at your highest level, and you want to make sure you're taking good care of those. And then as you think about your pipeline, I would branch out into those people you think have capacity who are current donors. If these are not current donors, if these are the Matt Damons and Oprahs of the world, or you think, oh, they've got a lot of capacity, I need you to dial that back, because you actually need to identify people who are philanthropic and want to give to your organization as well as they have capacity to give. So what you think people's capacity are is a good way to prioritize future outreach when you've really built that major donor program and your top donors are really well taken care of.
That's a good one. So you answered this one, but where do you shout it? About impact. I still want you to go into that again. I think some people are just joining us. It's worth repeating. Go ahead and say, where do you shout about impact? Where do you shout about your message?
Literally everywhere. On social media, on any written materials that go out the door. But when you have a conversation and someone says, hey, Sabrina, how you doing? Your answer is, I'm doing great. I'm working with this organization. We're doing phenomenal things. I'm so excited about it. We just achieved X. Life is awesome. And it gets woven into every conversation you have, because you will be so surprised who the people who align with you and the organization and the mission are in your world, who you didn't realize aligned before.
And you got to let people know. So Paige says, with impact stories, this is where our circle comes in handy. I'm new to the org I work at, and I have partnered with employees who have history and can share stories. So you mentioned employees as well. How do you get employees involved in that process?
From the beginning. So if you've never done any kind of impact reporting back to your donors, the first step is you you get your staff together in a staff meeting and say, okay, like what is the most exciting impact that we have just had? And how do you piece together that story? Once you've done that for the first time, and it's not necessarily a painless process, but once you've done that for the first time, you and your staff start to get a sense of what they should be what you should all be watching out for. So when you start programs, so I was in political advocacy and we were starting programs all the time because they were all, finite and time limited. So every time we started a new program, we started at the beginning of like, okay, what do we want our story to be at the end of this? And then we would think back, okay, so then what do we need to tell that story? Okay, these are the metrics we need to be watching for. These are the kinds of stories we need to be collecting from the folks we're working with. And so the more practice you get at that, the easier it is to be like, okay, this is kind of what we need to tell the story well, and we start to gather it. But when you start it for the first time, you just kind of have to do it for the first time and figure out like, what are these compelling stories of our organization's impact? Do the stories come from people? Do the stories come from data? Do the story, like, where does that story come from? And what do we need to have to tell it well? Because the first one is always going to be the wonkiest one you do. It's always going to be like the story you wished you could tell better, that in your heart that you could tell better, but they were things you weren't tracking and things you weren't, putting in a centralized location, couldn't actually access, and you learn from that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's one little tip that I will say around story and collecting those stories and getting to know your donors. Have several stories, because all stories are not going to resonate with different donors, right? Some donors might be passionate about literacy or some others. So have several stories that you're collecting and have that process in place. So Grace Kelly, I told you this morning, I love that name. I just love that name. Grace Kelly is asking, what is the best way to start the process with major gift donors? Letters asking for a gift with a follow-up versus a phone call versus in-person, ? So how do you go about that?
So I think about it as, what is the fastest way to a relationship? And keeping in mind that different people, we have so many mediums to choose from that different people choose different mediums. So it can actually be a series or compilation of this. But I often say, particularly when I work with board members, all right, send out an email first, like depending on the data you have. If you've got an email, reach out by email and ask for a meeting, whether that's a phone call, whether that's a Zoom, whether that's in person. You do it to your donors' comfort, especially now. You do it to your donors' comfort. The more in person that you can have, the better relationship, the stronger relationship you build. Simply because when we meet face to face, we actually, build stronger relationships. That said, if you're a national organization, your donors are all over the place, that may not make sense for you. Use the technology that you have. But I would say reach out to a potential donor at least 3 times for a meeting before you give up, right? You need to have some persistence, because if you send them the email, they may get the email and be like, oh, I have to respond to that. And they'll flag it in their email and then it's buried. Or maybe you don't have good data for that. Maybe it's the wrong email address, or it's a junk email address, or it's an email address they don't use anymore. And then you need to have a phone number and give them a call and be like, hey, I sent you a couple emails. I don't know if you got them, but I'm so-and-so and I do this and I would love to have a meeting. This is my phone number. People can use LinkedIn really successfully for this. LinkedIn message as a way to get a hold of folks. Some people are really responsive to that. Sometimes donors really like text, like you'll call them and they'll text you back. And you're like, oh, okay, so text is how you work. Okay, so I'll ask for that meeting by text. So it's a little bit, in today's world, 20 years ago, we all made phone calls. That's what we did. But now there are kind of too many options. So I think you have to feel it out. You have to be persistent enough that you think you've got a good shot of having been heard somewhere. And those who self-select to have that conversation with you are the folks to lean into.
Yeah, and just think about it. One of the things you said, I have this donor who's a major donor, and he goes, you send me an email, you're on my radar. I might see it, but I take you serious when you call me and follow up. So the email is kind of like his alert, but he doesn't pay attention until you call him. So everybody's different, right? Exactly what you're saying. You gotta communicate with people in multiple channels, and you have to be. I'm gonna say, Megan, I'm gonna say probably more than 3 times to reach out to people, only because I even know myself. Like I get emails make me nervous, very nervous. And so oftentimes, again, too, I ignore emails. I want to file them away because they're like a things to do list. And people have to reach out to me several times sometimes. So you gotta be flexible for your donors, and you can't take it personal.
No, this isn't about you. And also understand that if you're not getting response, like Vincent just put this in the chat, but if you're not getting a response, there are so many reasons why you might not be getting a response, and so few of those reasons have anything to do with you. So understand that, you've done your 3 times, in May. Then you come back in December and try again, because maybe in May, their child got married or there was a medical emergency. You just have no idea. It was just bad timing. So keep trying again. I feel like you're absolutely right, Sabrina. The persistence is key. There's a point that everyone will feel a little bit differently where they feel like there's a threshold of being annoying. Okay? And you have to be true to yourself as well as true to your donors, as persistent with your donors. So when you feel like, this is kind of bordering on harassment, maybe that's when you take a break and then come back 6 months later and try again. So, but more than once, fewer than 10.
Yeah, there you go. So Unbound Visual Art says sounds like asking for a date. And I always say that fundraising is like dating. It exactly is. You go on a blind date, you see if we can work together, you ask some questions, you go through that process of cultivation, building that relationship. At some point you ask somebody to, let's get married. And that's when you ask them for the gift. That is so much like dating. I always say it's like dating. And yes, Laura's asking, where can we get the 10 steps? Laura, at the end of this, I will drop that in the comments, and it will be there for you to download. And so we're just so appreciative of Megan being here. Megan, that was our final question there. I think I got all of them. Vincent did say he was very curious to hear about the 10 steps, and I think you went into it, but do you want to kind of highlight it one more time for him? What they're going to be getting?
So it's a checkbox list of the 10 things you need to make sure you remember to have a successful donor conversation. The things you need to make sure that you include in that conversation, and a little bit of what you need to make sure you do afterwards too. But these are kind of the basic things that you need to make sure you cover with every donor that you talk to, for your donor to feel appreciated, and for you to make for you to put your organization in the strongest position that you can in this donor conversation. So it's a great starting point. It really boils it down. When I work with executive directors or development staff, I go into much more kind of professionalized, this is the framework, this is how you think strategically about it. But when you're just starting out and the conversation terrifies you because you don't want to mess it up and you're not sure what it's supposed to be, and it feels like the stakes are really high, and they kind of can be, because you get one shot at a new donor. And so making sure that you're checking these boxes in your head as you go along, or hey, you're on a Zoom, have the checklist in front of you and check off those boxes.
The good thing about it is they can't see your checklist on Zoom.
It's not an ordered list. I'm not saying that this is the order in which you have this conversation. It's a checklist to make sure that you've hit these points at some point in a really organic relationship building conversation.
As you're dating your donor, you make sure these are my sets of questions that I'm going to ask on our dates. Yes. So thank you, Megan, so much for being here. How can people get in contact with you?
So people can, if you download the list, I'll be honest, you get on my weekly email, which you can unsubscribe from if it's not you and you don't want to do that. But I have a weekly email, and my website is meganamundson.com, which is also, very accessible if you get the download, and you can find out all about the services I provide and the way that I work with clients, and use the download as a starting point. I will also put a plug, Sabrina. I do a monthly Zoom gathering for folks. It's very informal. It's very casual. Cameras on. Folks engage in a conversation. Every month we have a topic, and it's just meant to be some learning. Ask your questions. Learn from peers. Learn from me, which is a lot of fun. So that happens on sometimes the third, sometimes the fourth Wednesday. I'm shaking it up these days. I had it. And I was like, I'm going to change it. And it's actually today. So get the download, and you can check out my website and go to meganamundson.com/Zoom, and then you can register for the Zoom as well.
Perfect. So, and if there's any topics you want to hear in our next sipping tea, I'm putting together Megan and I have discussed this. I'm working on 2023. I think she is too. But any topics you want to hear in 2023, let me know in the comments or let me know in this Facebook group, and we will make sure that we get someone on that specializes in that. And also tap the live button so you know the next time I go live. And you can also see other videos I've done by visiting my website at www.supportingworldhope.com. All these conversations are there with different people and just webinars that I do in general. So I encourage you to do that. You're on my list now, so you have access to the free VIP resource library, which is on my website as well. And I leave you with this. Your mission matters and deserves to be highlighted in your community. Your mission matters and can be an inspiration to those who need it the most. Your mission matters and deserves to be funded to its fullest capacity. And our next sipping tea, and the last for 2022, will be September the 21st. And our guest will be Sonia Amundson, and she's going to be talking about the relationship you have to asking, right? Which segue right into what Megan is talking about. Sometimes it's our mindset. And so come and hear that conversation on our next sipping tea. And with that, Megan, let's wave them out. Let's say bye. It's been great. Bye-bye, guys.
Loved it. Thanks, Sabrina.
Yes.